uniting a fractured Republican Party.
I was very encouraged with what I heard from Donald Trump today.
Donald Trump meets with House Speaker Paul Ryan and other GOP leaders. Women deacons? Pope Francis makes headlines with his willingness to study their role in the early church. Piecing together a 2-year-old mystery, what we're learning about the disappearance of Malaysia Flight 370. And a growing public health threat, building a national effort to address addiction to opiates. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, May 12th, 2016. Good evening from Washington. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. The Republican Party's two most visible figures, Donald Trump and Paul Ryan, meet face-to-face here in Washington today. Now, both call their meeting a positive step toward party unification. But Speaker Ryan stopped short of endorsing Trump's presidential campaign. Jason Calvi's been following the story all day. Jason?
Brian, after their meeting here, Trump and Ryan issued a joint statement saying it was a great conversation. They're pledging to work together to promote a conservative agenda. And I'm told the meeting received a special blessing. 7 Republican congressmen came together for 1 hour of prayer for Trump and Ryan.
Greeting the billionaire businessman today. Crowds and cameras, prayers
to God the Father,
and protesters.
Unafraid.
As Donald Trump meets behind closed doors with the country's highest-ranking Republican, a man who hasn't yet endorsed Trump.
We talked about life and how strongly we feel about this core principle. We talked about the Supreme Court and things like this. I was very encouraged with what I heard from Donald Trump today.
Life is an issue Arizona Congressman Trent Franks fights for. He now says he'll vote for Donald Trump.
What do you need to hear from Donald Trump to back him?
That he's going to beat Hillary Clinton.
The media billed this meeting as a showdown. But Trump supporter Congressman Chris Collins says today's meeting was not about Speaker Ryan getting concessions from Trump.
What is he willing to negotiate with Speaker Ryan? What does he need to give to Speaker Ryan today to get Speaker Ryan on the Trump train?
Well, the irony is he doesn't have to negotiate anything. This is not a negotiation. This is a get to know you.
So what did Ryan think of the larger-than-life figure?
His personality, I thought he's a very good personality. He's a very warm and genuine person. Like I said, I met him for like 30 seconds in 2012.
Speaker Ryan says he and Trump's policy teams will meet to get into the weeds, but added seeds were planted today for future Republican unity.
We believe in things like life. I know not everyone is pro-choice in our party, and we accept all comers, but we are a majority pro-life party, and these are things that are important to us.
And Donald Trump also met with Republican Senate leaders, including Leader Mitch McConnell. He tweeted out that it was a great visit here in D.C. He says things are working out really well. Brian?
Well, Jason, after a really divisive primary season, is there any sign that Republican voters can unite behind Trump?
A new Gallup poll shows that 2/3 of Republican-leaning voters now have a favorable view of Donald Trump. That is a huge reversal from a similar poll done in March.
Very interesting. Thank you, Jason. And the White House reacts to the Trump-Ryan meeting with a sharp critique of Republicans. Chief White House correspondent and political director Lauren Ashburn reports.
Brian, White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest said he read the joint statement with amusement. In the briefing room, he wouldn't comment specifically on the Republicans coming together on Capitol Hill. He did, however, criticize what he calls Republicans' inaction on their agenda.
But right now, we see Republicans much more focused on their relationship with the presumptive nominee than they are on things like passing a budget or passing funding for the Zika virus to avert a public health disaster or passing much-needed funding to relieve the financial turmoil on Puerto Rico that's having a negative impact on 3 million Americans who live there.
The press secretary is regularly asked to weigh in on who the president will support to run against Republicans, and he declines. He does say the president will be protecting the administration's progress over the last 7 years. Brian?
Lauren Ashburn at the White House. Thanks, Lauren. Donald Trump says there's nothing to learn from the income tax returns that he won't release until an ongoing audit is complete. Some tax experts disagree. They say the huge stack of returns that he's posed with for photos could provide significant insights into his business and his personal dealings. They would reveal how much he makes, how much he gives to charity, the health of his businesses, and how he plays the tax game. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. Pope Francis says he is willing to create a commission to study the role women played as deacons in the early church. The Pope's comments came during a meeting with the superiors of women's religious orders. The Holy Father in no way signaled support for the ordination of women. Father Bob Gahl, professor of ethics and moral theology at the Pontifical University of the Holy Cross, joining us from Rome tonight. Father, did women serve as deacons in the early church? And if so, what was their role?
We know from St. Paul that there was at least one deacon, Phoebe, back in the early church in Asia Minor. We also have other indications. We even have an indication of a kind of ritual for establishing women deacons back before the year 300 in the early church. But it's really important, this has always been distinguished between these female deacons and male deacons who are actually ordained to sacred mystery as part of the sacrament of holy orders. So these deaconesses, of which St. Paul, for instance, speaks and which go back to the early church, were not participating in the sacrament of holy orders.
So is the Holy Father opening up the possibility of women serving in ordained ministry?
Well, Pope Francis is very much aware that he was elected Pope with a commission to reform the church. And he's going about this with what he calls parousia, which is a Greek word that indicates a kind of boldness in the Holy Spirit. But this boldness in the Holy Spirit of reform is not revolution. It's always in continuity with the apostolic tradition. So Pope Francis has this daring readiness to go back and look at the tradition, and it should be a fascinating discovery for all of us. It will also help us to understand what is specific to the sacrament of holy orders, which we know are bishops, priests, and deacons. In the year 2002, what used to be called the Holy Office, the Congregation for Doctrine of the Faith, already did a study of the diaconate in general. And it was a fascinating study which came to conclusions regarding female deacons. And it concludes that it's really very different from the sacrament of holy orders. These were women who were chosen in the early church to serve in a church ministry. Specifically, they were especially used in the administration of baptism to adult women who were converts, which was normally done through immersion with people who weren't clothed. And there it was very helpful to have women who were established in this ministry alongside the bishop to aid the bishop.
Excellent explanation of this willingness to explore our history. Father Bob Gahl, thanks for joining us from Rome.
Thank you, Brian.
We have more explanation to do. We brought a couple of professors to the table. Dr. Chad Pecknold, theology professor, Dr. Melissa Moschella, a philosophy professor, both from the Catholic University of America. What else do we know about the women who served as deacons in the early church?
It was primarily in the Eastern Church, and the reason for it was due in part to the fact that there were very strict social and cultural norms about the separation of men and women in those parts of the world, such that although both men and women participated in the life of the church, everything was separated by sex. So there was a men's section of the church, a women's section of the church. It would have been scandalous, for instance, for a priest to go bring communion to a sick woman in the parish, and therefore it was necessary to have women who would act as ministers to serve other women when that would have been culturally inappropriate for a male priest to do.
So when the Holy Father says, we could study this, what does that mean when the Vatican is going to study something?
Well, sometimes it's like your parents saying, we'll think about it.
Yeah.
But I think here the Holy Father was very clear when he was asked this would be useful for the church to clarify its teaching, and he promised to go ask the CDF if any studies had been done. And as Father Gahl just mentioned, there are studies which have been done, and he also suggested that CDW, the Divine Worship, could provide a further explanation, thus telling the religious sisters and the superiors there that this was intimately connected to doctrine and worship, and in some sense connected to questions about the unchangeability of this doctrine. So I think the Holy Father is inclining to study in a sense of returning to the studies that have already been done.
Well, we're hearing this called a major step. What should we make of this statement today?
I think the initial media responses saying that this is perhaps a move toward opening women and having women in the priesthood, I think that's a complete misinterpretation of what's going on. That's already been definitively and infallibly declared that the priesthood is only for men within the Catholic Church. So there's no way that door is being opened here. As Chad said, this is just kind of clarifying what we already know and studying it further so that people can better understand what's going on.
The most revealing thing is when the Holy Father turned the conversation to clericalism and said that clericalism was a sinful attitude. A sinful attitude when priests lord their power over others, but also sinful, he says, when women and lay persons ask for their life to be clericalized. He doesn't think that women and laymen should be asking to be clericalized, but that should recognize the dignity of their own baptismal vows, of their own religious vows, and rise up to that dignity of that service.
Yes, and I guess we're really seeing kind of classic Francis too, being open, listening, and letting people know that he hears them.
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
all right, Dr. Melissa Moschella, Dr. Chad Pecknold, thank you both for being with us.
Thank you.
A federal judge rules the Obama administration is unconstitutionally spending federal money to fund Obamacare. The government will spend $175 billion over 10 years reimbursing health insurers to reduce co-payments for lower-income Americans. House Republicans, you may recall, sued the administration, arguing Congress never appropriated that money, in fact, denied the request for it. Implementation of today's ruling is delayed while the case is appealed. House members tackle what they call a drug epidemic. This week, Congress is working to pass more than a dozen bills hoping to curb opioid addiction. Wyatt Goolsby reports now from Capitol Hill. Wyatt?
Brian, it's rare that Democrats and Republicans agree on any one major issue, but this week nearly everyone agrees that the opioid problem, which includes addiction to painkillers, has become such a big enough crisis that it requires an even bigger response.
The misuse of and addiction to opioids, such as heroin, morphine, and other prescription pain medications, has had a devastating hold on this country.
It impacts the young, the old, poor, rich, male, female, and it ruins the lives of all those involved.
I urge my colleagues in joining me to call for further action that holds pharmaceutical companies accountable.
This week, House members are debating more than a dozen bills aimed at reducing opioid prescriptions, preventing overdoses, and improving treatment for vulnerable groups. It's estimated every 19 minutes, someone dies from an accidental drug overdose. Most of the time, it's from prescription drugs prescribed to dull pain. But like other opioids, they also boost dopamine, giving some people a high.
It is a powerful, powerful substance, and it changes the way the nerves in the brain function.
TV show host Dr. Phil McGraw testified on Capitol Hill today. He warned lawmakers that drug addiction often rips families apart, which is why he says legislation should focus on recovery while keeping families together. A disease that has become so widespread, House Republicans, including Speaker Paul Ryan, chose to wear purple ribbons for drug abuse awareness. But the White House is blasting Republicans on their proposals, saying it lacks the funds to truly tackle the problem.
President Obama had proposed $1.1 billion in funding to fight opioid addiction in his last budget, but that amount was rejected by Republican lawmakers. House Speaker Paul Ryan says that this new set of bills that's on the table this week are better because they address certain specific groups like addiction, how veterans are affected by addiction, as well as how babies are impacted by their parents' addiction to drugs. Brian?
Wyatt Goolsby at the Capitol. Thank you, Wyatt. The congressional panel investigating Planned Parenthood now focuses on late-term abortionist Leroy Carhart. His Maryland clinic is one of the few in the nation to perform abortions during the third trimester of pregnancy. At least 5 women who sought abortions there reportedly ended up in the hospital. Tennessee Representative Marsha Blackburn chairs the Select Investigative Panel on Infant Lives. Representative Blackburn, how is it that abortionist Leroy Carhart can still practice?
Well, this is one of the things people would like to know, is how he does stay in practice. And it's one of the reasons we're looking closely at the clinic where Dr. Carhart performs abortions. They are one of the few second, third trimester abortion providers in the country, and certainly on the eastern seaboard. And our concern grows out of the knowledge and awareness that we have had 5 women admitted to hospitals and needing emergency care coming out of those facilities since the first of the year.
And if the evidence shows that there is abuse in this clinic and these women are at risk, isn't this something that everyone should be able to get behind, protecting the health of women and stopping late-term abortionists?
Well, one would think that it is something everyone could get behind. We are very concerned about what is happening to women who are going to this clinic. We know that there have been questions from the medical community in Maryland. Our select panel is charged with looking at the medical practices of abortion providers, and that is the reason that we are looking at Dr. Carhart and going to investigate the clinic and the doctor.
Also, could you update us on the subpoena issued for financial documents for STEM Express, the tissue procurement company that works with Planned Parenthood? Have you seen any of these documents yet?
We have not. We have seen attorney-produced documents, but we have not seen accounting records. And Title 42 USC 289G2 is actually an accounting provision. That is an accounting statute. And to profit from the sale of human body parts is a felony offense. It is a 10-year felony offense. And we have requested these documents. We have not received these documents. Therefore, we have subpoenaed these documents. We look forward to receiving them so that we can continue with the panel's investigative work.
Chair of the Select Investigative Panel on Infant Lives, Representative Marsha Blackburn. Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up, lawmakers explore ways to prevent suicide among veterans and new developments in the disappearance of Malaysia Flight 370 2 years ago. Thank you so much for joining us this Thursday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff blasts her critics and vows to fight her impeachment.
Fazer com que a tristeza diminua.
Rousseff is accused of using illegal accounting tricks in managing Brazil's federal budget. The Senate has 180 days to decide if she should be permanently removed from office. Her suspension ends 13 years of rule by the left-leaning Workers' Party. It's credited with lifting millions out of poverty, but vilified for being at the wheel as billions were siphoned from the state oil company. Investigators say 2 pieces of debris found in March are almost certainly from Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. They were found on beaches in South Africa and the Indian Ocean island of Mauritius. The discoveries came 2 years after that plane disappeared on a flight from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. One piece shows part of the Rolls-Royce logo, the engine manufacturer. The other is a main cabin interior panel. Despite an extensive search of the Indian Ocean, we still don't know where and why that plane crashed. Lawmakers criticized the Transportation Security Administration today for slow security checks and long lines at airports. TSA Chief Peter Neffinger says it's about managing risks. He says the TSA has doubled the number of travelers now cleared for pre-check.
The risk-based approach is the more people I get into trusted traveler programs, the more I can move them through expedited and the more we can focus on those who aren't.
Neffinger says he's also prioritized TSA's counter-terrorist mission with a renewed focus on security and training. 22 veterans take their own lives every day. That shocking statistic directly from a Department of Veterans Affairs study. Mental health and military experts met today for a congressional hearing on veteran suicide prevention. U.S. Army veteran Joy Ilem testified today. You're the Director of Legislation for the Disabled Veterans of America. Explain the mental health toll suffered by people, especially in combat situations.
Exactly. There's a huge mental health toll on veterans, especially wartime veterans, those who've had multiple deployments, those who've had combat experience. And when you lay on top of that a wartime injury, which can be devastating to a veteran, that can be a lifelong change and readjustment and impact on mental health.
We have many more women now serving in the military and even in combat situations. You testified that a woman veteran is 6 times more likely to commit suicide than a civilian woman. Is there enough help for these women?
I think the main question is, are the services that are out there, the programs and services for suicide prevention, really tailored to meet the unique needs of women veterans? We know as they're serving, when they come back, they have a different military experience and how they process and go through their readjustment. So we need to make sure those programs and services are also working for them.
Is there progress in that area?
I think there is. VA has made tremendous progress in research on women veterans. They have higher rates of mental health needs, and they're meeting those needs. The programs are working, and actually if you're a VA patient for a woman veteran, you're 75% less likely to commit suicide than a non-veteran.
The DAV does such great work with veterans. From where you sit, what do you think needs to happen to really turn this trend around?
There has to be ready access for mental health services for our nation's veterans. When they come home from combat deployments, it's absolutely essential that they get the services that they need. If they're isolated, if they're out in the community and they're on their own, there's a higher chance they're more vulnerable, they can be at risk. So we have to make sure that no matter where those veterans land, we reach out to them, and DAV tries to do just that.
Joy Ilem with the Disabled American Veterans, thank you, and thank you for your service.
Thank you so much.
Up next, Pope Francis encourages Christian unity, his message to people who interfere. And the authors of Witness to Love describe their parish-based approach to marriage preparation.
Quello che parla sporca, distrugge.
Gossip destroys people and lives, says Pope Francis. The devil wants us divided, but Jesus prays for the unity of Christians that we may be one. Thank you for joining us for EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick. Pope Francis's recent document on the family calls for stronger marriage preparation. It's a mission a Louisiana couple takes to heart and shares with parishes nationwide. Husband and wife team Ryan and Mary Rose Verrett are founders of Witness of Love, a marriage preparation program based on the book that they authored together. So your program is based in part on a mentor couple working directly with an engaged couple. Give us an example of who that mentor couple might be.
Absolutely. Well, it would be someone involved in their parish whose marriage they admire, someone who's been married 5 years or more. So it's not a lot to require, but grace builds on nature, and it's a great starting point, and it's a great connection to the parish for that engaged couple.
And I would imagine it would be an attractive couple, someone that you'd want to spend time with.
Right. I mean, if you're attracted to what someone has and who they are, you're going to want to spend time with them. You're going to want to grow and learn with them and from them.
So what practical and spiritual components are in Witness to Love?
Yeah, practically speaking, it would be sort of an emphasis on the virtues, the classical virtues, particularly friendship, kindness, those types of things, how essential they are to maintaining a relationship. And then the spiritual side of it was just a deep understanding of the incarnation, the reality that the necessity of the sacraments in the life of the parish and the church, in particular, this to sustain a couple that's been, it's going to be married soon.
I wish something like this were in place when I got married many, many, many years ago. Pope Francis calling for, a real more of a focus on marriage preparation. Do you think we need to re-look at this for this next generation, how we approach it?
Absolutely. In Familiaris Consortio, they talked about the importance of marriage preparation, but they also said the importance of integrating couples into the life of the parish. And that has been brought up again in Amoris Laetitia, that we have to find new ways to reach and witness and inspire these couples and get them involved. And so I think Amoris Laetitia is really asking us to find new and creative ways of getting couples in church.
How does strengthening marriage and marriages strengthen the parish and the community?
We basically help them to take people out of isolation, this sort of reality of our generation not getting involved in a community, but realizing the parish is going to be maybe one of those only substantial homes, consistent homes of faith. And so if we get them back and connected, we've seen that in our own parish in South Louisiana, where couples coming back to church and they're getting their children baptized, standing outside of church and just being there and present in the community.
Absolutely.
So all of us as parishioners can be part of this effort.
Absolutely, yes. And of the diocese, the 55 dioceses that we've been working with, that is the most attractive, most important thing to them, is getting couples involved in the life of the church.
Keep up your great work. Witness to Love, Marriage Preparation, based on the book written by Ryan and Mary Rose Verrett. Thank you both for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And until tomorrow, for the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. Good night. May God bless you.